Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Rebbe's Lens, our weekly webcast exploring the Rebbe's perspective to many areas of life. If this is your first time here, each week we take one topic and we try to do a letter or two or three of the Rebbe on that topic so that we gain an appreciation for that topic and can enhance our lives in that way. So welcome. We'll give it another minute for people to arrive. Put my phone silent. Okay, I think we'll dive right into it. So our topic today is public menorah lightings. I should mention that this was the topic that was chosen 2 weeks ago. As I was looking at the schedule of Tuesdays, I figured on Hanukkah would be a good idea to talk about public menorah lightings. And the subcaption is a symbol of freedom. Today being the second day of Hanukkah, we're going to try and explore several letters examining the importance and significance of lighting the menorah in the public sphere, which was a campaign that started in the 1970s, which the Rebbe was very, very pro. The reason I'm saying that the topic was scheduled over 2 weeks ago is because, of course, in light of recent events in Sydney, Australia, this becomes an even more pertinent topic. I was at someone's house yesterday delivering a menorah, Jewish man, and he brought up an oft-quoted, and I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong, but an oft-quoted point that, unfortunately, to a lot of Jews, Hanukkah is, because it's at the same time of the year as other holidays, therefore it becomes a competition. They have decorations, therefore we need to have decorations. They have presents, therefore we have to have gelt. They have this, therefore we have to have this, etc. And I'm sure I'll leave it to historians to tell us exactly how much of Hanukkah was influenced in that way. I'm sure there is to one degree or another. But the Rebbe viewed Hanukkah as a very, very different event. As a holiday celebrating something very, very different. The reason I say this is because, of course, it is true what everybody says, that in theory, Hanukkah is, quote unquote, a minor holiday. It is a rabbinical holiday. It is a holiday that commemorates one time that Jews, not only survived persecution and oppression, but that they thrived through it and they overcame it, etc. But why make such a big deal out of it? Why does it become such a big deal? So if you have a pessimistic and cynical view, you say it's because it's around the same time of year as other holidays. But to the Rebbe, Hanukkah was a powerful message that the world was in desperate need of, especially in the 21st century. And the Rebbe, I think the Rebbe gets a lot of credit, and Chabad gets a lot of credit for taking Hanukkah and propelling it to where it is today. I mean, it helps that probably their messages, Chabad and Hanukkah's message is very, very similar. Spreading light over darkness. With your small candle, you can light up the world, etc. All that sort of thing. But the Rebbe saw in Hanukkah a message that was extremely necessary for every single one of us. And to start off today's lesson, I want to bring us back to 1974. So in 1974, the Rebbe launched something that he called Miftzah Hanukkah. So if you're familiar a little bit with Chabad, a lot of the things that Chabad does and the way that the Rebbe operated were in military language. Think of mitzvah tanks or things like that, or God being referred to as the commander-in-chief. You see this throughout the Rebbe's letters, throughout the Rebbe's talks, particularly to children. Maybe one day we can do a segment on that. The Rebbe specifically wanted the military language to be used with children. He called children the army of God. Okay, different conversation we could have for a different time. And in continuation of this, whenever the Rebbe would launch a new idea, it would be called a campaign, almost like a military campaign, as if we're fighting the waves of assimilation with these military campaigns. And there's many of them. There's the famous 10. So there's the 10 mitzvah campaigns, right? Think tefillin and Shabbat candles and kosher and family purity and education and Torah and which ones am I missing? Tzedakah and buying Jewish books and mezuzah. I don't know which one or two I'm forgetting. Either way. But then in addition to those 10 mitzvah campaigns, the official 10-point mitzvah campaigns, the Rebbe also had not smaller campaigns, but seasonal campaigns, I should say, which were launched at different times with certain emphases on certain particular aspects of holidays or of particular seasons. So think of, for example, Passover. Certainly there was a general campaign with Passover, as many Jews as possible should keep Passover and should attend the Seder, etc. But specifically the Rebbe's campaign was for Shmura Matzah. Now is not the time to talk about it, but exactly what Shmura Matzah is, maybe we can do a segment on that when Pesach comes a little closer. But specifically that every Jew at their Seder should have Shmura Matzah. Okay, beautiful. So when it came to Hanukkah as well, the Rebbe launched Miftzah Hanukkah, which means a Hanukkah campaign. And the objective was that every single Jewish person should be given the opportunity to light a menorah. And the Rebbe explained that a menorah is unique because it brings light to everyone who sees it, not just to the person who's lighting it, but to everybody who sees the menorah. The Rebbe emphasized that it includes non-Jews who see the menorah and recognize the Hanukkah miracle and all the messages that come together with Hanukkah, which we'll expand upon in just a minute. As a result of this campaign that the Rebbe had for Hanukkah, there were some Hasidim that took it upon themselves to try and have a public menorah made. I mean, it's not clear entirely whether they got this idea directly from the Rebbe's talks or if they were trying to be creative and come up with good ideas, etc. But it seems that simultaneously in three places, in Westwood here in California, right in front of the Chabad House, in Philadelphia, right in front of Independence Hall, and in San Francisco in Union Square, at the same time, it seems that three public menorah initiatives were started at the same time. So this is 1975, the year after the Rebbe launches the Hanukkah campaign. Of course, all Chabad Hasidim are doing their best to give out menorahs and encourage people to light menorah and teach about menorah and publicize menorah, heeding the Rebbe's call. But specifically, there starts this business with public menorahs. There's this famous picture, I pulled it up here for you, of Rabbi Avraham Shem Tov, who's the Chabad Shliach to American Friends of Lubavitch, which is Washington, D.C., as well as the Chabad Shliach in Philadelphia. And there's a lighting of what today is known as the very first public menorah in 1975. And there's yeshiva boys who are very proud of the fact that they built it together with him. They're standing with it together. That's Independence Hall, 1975. You can see that picture there. So that's one of them. And then let's talk about let me see if there's pictures in this article of the other ones that I wanted to talk about. Here's the one in Union Square. This picture is from 1976. It's a 22-foot mahogany menorah. It was put up in San Francisco's Union Square by Rabbi Chaim Drizin. So that's a picture of that one. And this way, Hasidim were started doing this everywhere. Now, over the next 5 years, from 1975 through, I would say, 1941, there were a lot of what are known as menorah battles. So menorah battles is basically there were different counties or different even Jewish federations that pushed back against the concept of a public menorah, particularly of a menorah on public property. And really these menorah wars, as I've seen some people title them, continued all the way through 1989. In 1989, the whole thing was pretty much put to bed in a notable case that made it all the way to the Supreme Court. There was the County of Allegheny versus the ACLU in 1989. And then the Supreme Court ruled, here I'll read to you the AI overview, I just Googled it. The U.S. Supreme Court addressed menorah displays in public spaces, ruling that a menorah placed next to an Xmas tree and a liberty sign in a public area was constitutional because its combined secular context, celebrating winter holidays, downplayed its religious endorsement, unlike a stand. Anyway, going through the whole thing. And this established precedent that public displays featuring menorahs are permissible because they don't necessarily endorse Judaism specifically as much as they endorse religious freedom. During this time, there were a few letters that the Rebbe wrote about the public menorahs, and that's what I wanted to read today. So I wanted to read two things today. Number one is this letter, which is a pretty lengthy letter, by the grace of God, 25th of Cheshvan, 5742, which is 1982 at this point. This is with regards to a public menorah in, I think it was in Teaneck, New Jersey, and it seems that it's written to a lawyer in Hasbrook Heights, which is that area. And the Rebbe writes greeting and blessing. And in this letter, the Rebbe basically goes through a pretty comprehensive. Oh, I'm sorry, that was the wrong letter. That was not the letter I wanted to read. Then, for those of you that have the hand, that you're welcome to read that letter as well. This is what I was looking for. This is from by the grace of God, the 8th of Shvat, 5745. This is 1985. A comprehensive defense of the public menorah, Brooklyn, New York. The Rebbe is writing to the president of the American Jewish Committee. And basically, the Rebbe is going to give a very comprehensive, as you can see, it's a few pages, this letter. We'll go through it fairly quickly, where the Rebbe goes through why he believes that menorahs in public spaces are not only important, but actually are constitutional and are crucial for the 21st century, for Jews and even for non-Jews, and the message that the menorah has. All right, so let's dive into the letter, and then we'll do a little more supplementary stuff afterwards, as well as a discussion about it. All right, the Rebbe writes, greeting and blessing. This is to acknowledge your letter in which you outline your objections to the display of Hanukkah menorahs on public land, urging us to reconsider our movement's policy. In reply, I will likewise outline our position of this subject matter. So this letter is essentially the Rebbe defending to other Jews, right? This is the president of the American Jewish Committee, the AJC. The Rebbe is defending to them the concept of putting a menorah on public land. By way of a prefatory remark, I trust we are both of the same belief that all American citizens and citizen groups and organizations have equal right to freely express their opinions and convictions in a pluralistic society such as the American Jewish Committee, with a variety of religious denominations and ethnic groups. Each such group, through its organizations, endeavors to preserve and promote its particular cultural and other interests. So in other words, Rebbe says, first of all, let's just establish that we live in a country where there's freedom of religion, and we hope that every religion is provided with equal opportunity to express themselves. Similarly, one would expect an organization that has the component Jewish in its official name to be dedicated to the Jewish interest. I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger. To the Jewish interest, right? Emphasis on the Jewish. Any activity that is not directly connected with the Jewish interest is extraneous to the true aims and purpose of a Jewish organization, has no claim on its resources. This surely also applies to the American Jewish Congress as the Union of Orthodox Jewish Congregations and all other organizations speaking on behalf of Jews and Jewishness, each concentrating on the particular aspect of Jewishness it represents. So is our Chabad Lubavitch movement dedicated to promoting Torah, true Yiddishkeit, permeated with Hasidic warmth and love towards all our Jewish brethren without exception. I need hardly add that we regard as our Jewish brethren anyone born of a Jewish mother who has embraced Judaism according to halacha. So here the Rebbe basically just says that I am the head of a Jewish organization. I feel that my Jewish organization, the goal of it is, and he states what the Rebbe views as the goal of Chabad, which in and of itself is a cool concept. Like the Rebbe does that every once in a while in a letter, not often, but every once in a while you can find it. And I think that's a pretty cool thing to see, that the way the Rebbe viewed Chabad, what is the Chabad Lubavitch movement? It is, quote, dedicated to promoting Torah, true Yiddishkeit, permeated with Hasidic warmth and love towards all our Jewish brethren without exception. And then, of course, with an asterisk to make sure that we know that you don't have to be Orthodox in order to be Jewish. You don't have to be keeping all of halacha in order to be Jewish. You just have to be halachically Jewish. Okay. And now the Rebbe starts to go through the reasons why he feels that a public menorah is important. I trust, says the Rebbe, that you will also agree that there is hardly any child or adult in the USA who does not know about Xmas and New Year's Day, or why the post office, banks, etc. are closed on those days. Therefore, a public display of a creche and the like does not add any knowledge to the viewer or passerby, nor is its purpose to disseminate any such knowledge. So the Rebbe's point here is that if you put up an Xmas tree, or you put up a wreath on your door, or any such or decorations outside your house, you're not teaching anyone about Xmas. You're not teaching anyone about New Year's. What you are is just general awareness. Every single person that lives in the U.S. is aware of these holidays. It is quite different, says the Rebbe in point number 2, in the case of the Hanukkah menorah. To our sorrow and shame, there are tens of thousands of Jews in the USA who have no knowledge whatever of their Jewish identity, who know nothing about our major so-called high holidays, not to mention the so-called minor holidays of Hanukkah and Purim. And here's where the Rebbe gets to what the point of the public menorah is. The purpose and only purpose, this is not even a public menorah, this is any menorah. The purpose and only purpose of the Hanukkah menorah is, therefore, to bring to their attention that there is such a thing as a Jewish holiday called Hanukkah, which is observed by, among other things, lighting the menorah each night of the 8 nights of Hanukkah, starting with 1 light and increasing the number to 8, and that it has a meaningful and eternal message, historically and contemporarily, a message every Jew can be proud of. Moreover, says the Rebbe, and here we get to the public menorah. So till now we've been talking about just any menorah. If any Jew sits and watches a menorah, and I gave a class on Sunday for those of you that were watching live on Facebook about the whole concept of listening to the candles and the importance of listening to the message that the menorah has for us, etc. Says the Rebbe, moreover, lighting the menorah in a public place, with the consent, indeed with the assistance of the authorities, federal, state, county, or village, is also a tribute and credit to the American way, which gives free expression to any and all of the various religious denominations and to practice their religions openly and freely. Not as in some less fortunate countries, where to this very day no such religious freedom is allowed, much less encouraged. This too is something of which every American can justly be proud of, and every Jew justly grateful to Hashem. So says the Rebbe, the menorah in the public space serves now a few purposes. It services the general point of a menorah, which is that a person should be aware of Hanukkah and aware of the miracle of Hanukkah and the messages that Hanukkah has for every one of us till today. Number one. Number two, it stands as a symbol of a country that provides freedom of expression for various religious denominations to practice a religious openly and freely. Okay, says the Rebbe, experience has shown, and here the Rebbe is talking now, remember this is 1985, 10 years after the first public menorah. At this point, you guys know Chabadniks, there's public menorahs all over the place. Says the Rebbe, experience has shown that the Hanukkah menorah has had a salutary, often even catalytic effect on countless Jews to move towards an identification or closer identification with their Jewish people and Jewish heritage. I can attest to this personally because of our public menorahs here and how many people have reached out to us with emails, with phone calls, or even more with in-person interactions where they come to our houses for Shabbat dinner, to our shuls, to our Chabad events, etc. As a result of a public menorah where they're just driving by or walking by and they see a menorah being lit in the public space with Jews out in the open, Jewish pride on display. This has a ripple effect for Jews for many, many days and weeks and months and years following the menorah lighting. And says the Rebbe, this is another additional point that it connects Jews with their heritage. Thus, says the Rebbe, if in the first year or two of lighting the menorahs, there may have been any doubt about the practical benefit of this display, no such doubts can be entertained at all anymore. Seeing the widespread, positive, and enthusiastic response from concerned Jews of various walks of life, and furthermore, seeing the thousands upon thousands of Jews in whom the Hanukkah menorah has kindled the spark of Jewishness that has been well nigh totally eclipsed through the lack of exposure to any Jewish experience, and whose life had been completely empty of anything Jewish through no fault of theirs, it can truly be said that the Hanukkah menorahs have brought a new light into their lives. In light of the above, says the Rebbe, there is no logical basis for comparing the Hanukkah menorah to creatures or similar displays, much less to the idea of running a competitive race with or counteracting every municipal creature and the like, as you suggest. Nothing could be further removed from reality than the idea of such motivation behind the Hanukkah menorahs. So here's where the Rebbe gets to the crux of the letter that was apparently written to him from the AJC, and which, as I mentioned earlier, somebody shared with me yesterday at his door how silly he thinks it is that we're making menorah lightings outside City Hall or places like that, and all we're trying to do is compete with secular holidays. This is exactly what the Rebbe says. If point number 6 is the way you look at this, then you have sorely missed the point. The whole point of a public menorah is actually nothing to do with competing with other religions. The other religions have no need for publicizing it. The whole point of a public menorah is in order to awaken the spark in a Jew. That a Jew who walks by, sees a menorah, becomes aware of a holiday called Hanukkah, becomes aware of the message of Hanukkah, ideally if he's even attending the event, and he'll hear the message of Hanukkah, etc. And then that will awaken his neshama, his soul, and the spark inside. Okay. Now to another point. In their letter, obviously, they challenged the constitutionality. Remember, this is before the Supreme Court ruling in 1989, right? Allegheny v. ACLU. Says the Rebbe, as for the constitutionality of the Hanukkah menorahs on public property, surely you can rely on the authority of the U.S. Supreme Court. Ooh, this is after it? I don't think it was. Okay, I'll have to look into that. Did I get the date wrong? Maybe it was 1979, not 1989. Okay. In any event, the Rebbe says, surely you can rely on the authority of the U.S. Supreme Court as well as the authority of the president and previous presidents of the U.S. who either personally participated in the ceremony of lighting a Hanukkah menorah or sanctioned it, as well as on the authority of the various governors and mayors in all parts of the USA who welcomed it. Pause. Let's talk about that. So one of the things how do we stop this share? Because I'd like to show you guys a few things. Okay, so one of the things that happened together with the Rebbe's push for awareness of Hanukkah and with the public menorah lighting entering the public sphere, etc., is that it started to become a very, very publicly attended event. So in 1980, then President Jimmy Carter attended the menorah lighting on the White House lawn. So this is a picture of that in 1980. Sorry, I didn't really prepare these pictures to share them, but here you go. I have an article here that I'm kind of quoting from here and there. So that's one picture. And then later on, when was it? I don't remember what year it was, but during the presidency of Ronald Reagan, a delegation of shluchim presented President Ronald Reagan with a menorah, a gift of a menorah, and here you can see them. And for those of you that are familiar, this is my wife's grandfather, Rabbi Shmuel David Reitchik, who was the first Chabad Shliach to the state of California. So there he is, and they're presenting it to Ronald Reagan, presenting it with a menorah. So in other words, the Rebbe is calling attention to the fact that there are not only public menorahs all around the country. Not only is there a Supreme Court ruling, but in addition to all of that, there are also presidents and lawmakers that are endorsing these things. Okay, where were we? Let's bring back up the letter. Here you go. Okay, says the Rebbe, number 8. And this I think is the Rebbe getting a little personal here. Nor do I think, says the Rebbe, it is the primary duty of the American Jewish, emphasizing the word Jewish in their name, committee, or any other national or local Jewish organization to defend the Constitution of the USA, for which purpose there are specific organizations whose explicit aim and purpose is just that. It has never been a Jewish value to defend the Constitution. We believe in the Constitution. We like the Constitution. It provides us with many amazing things, but it's not our job to go and defend the Constitution. Surely, says the Rebbe, the energy and money that is expended on the defense of the U.S. Constitution by the AJC and other Jewish organizations would be better spent on Jewish causes, such as supporting Jewish education, to mention one, so that it would not be necessary to remind Jews about Hanukkah through the menorahs and public spaces, there being no other way to send them a personal message to this effect. Says the Rebbe, the AJC's stated goal is to help Jews, right, to educate Jews. So Jewish education is another big issue. The Rebbe Jewish education was always the number one issue on the Rebbe's agenda and list of issues. In fact, the central Chabad office is actually called Menorahs L'Inyanei Chinuch, the Center for Issues of Education, namely Jewish education. And everything that the Rebbe did, the Rebbe viewed as a way of either supplementing Jewish education, providing Jewish education, or making up for lack of Jewish education. In other words, all the efforts of Chabad are essentially not what the Rebbe really wants to be involved in. It's all really just reacting to the fact that there wasn't enough Jewish education. Therefore, there are some Jews who are not aware of their identity, etc. Okay. The Rebbe keeps going. So in other words, the Rebbe says, if you don't like the public menorah, render it unnecessary. Invest in Jewish education. I don't think the Rebbe would ever back down from the public menorah, but here the Rebbe is making a point that your money and your resources and your time and your efforts should be invested into Jewish education. Much more, says the Rebbe, could be and ought to be said on the subject matter at hand. However, it being our first exchange of correspondence, I do not wish to put it under the mark of recrimination and the like. But the Rebbe is going to push back on certain things that the Rebbe feels very principled about. I must, however, take strong exception to your using such expressions as unprincipled and opportunistic, which, with all due respect, I found quite incredible coming from a person in your position. Deep felt, sincere concern for the immediate and long-term vital Jewish interests and benefits hardly deserves to be characterized by those epithets. The Rebbe already made it clear at the beginning of the letter exactly what the stated goal of Chabad is, and that is educating Jews about their Judaism, bringing Torah, true Judaism to the Jewish masses, with permeated with Hasidic warmth and love, etc., to every single Jew, Asher B'Shem Yisrael Yechuna, anybody who has the name Jew. Right? Okay, beautiful. Says the Rebbe, I must also question your categorical assertions expressed in your letter several times. This is an unfortunate reality that big Jewish organizations, once they gain a certain amount of power, they often tend to do this. Says the Rebbe, in various forms, such as near unanimous view, entire Jewish community, Jewish consensus, of one mind, etc. Says the Rebbe, I do not know who gave you such misinformation, which is entirely a variance with several factual aspects mentioned in your letter. Surely it is common knowledge that Lubavitch is not the one conspicuous exception, and that many Orthodox Jewish groups share the Lubavitch approach. In other words, the Rebbe is taking issue with the fact that now that you're in a position where you represent Jews, so now you think that you can set policy for Jews. You need to represent all Jews. And if Jews have different opinions, you cannot say there's a unanimous approach when Lubavitch, for example, Chabad, has a different approach. In conclusion, says the Rebbe, to paraphrase or use your expressions, I certainly agree that, quote, American Jews have always insisted on equality, not tolerance, but I wish that, like all good things, it would begin to be more fully and constantly and consistently practiced at home. In other words, with Jews. We shouldn't just fight for equality for other people, but also for ourselves, for Jews. I also wish, says the Rebbe, that every Jewish child would be given equal opportunity to become acquainted with his or her Jewish heritage as with their American heritage. And again, to use your expression, I urge you to reconsider your position, not only on the issue of Hanukkah menorahs, but also the whole range of topics, some of which have been mentioned here in passing. I trust you will accept my remarks in the spirit they have been made with blessing. This is a fascinating letter, and it's a letter that really speaks to the way the Rebbe viewed the public menorah lightings. But I want to end off with one other beautiful little tidbit that we have. Okay, so this is from that article that I was showing before from the magazine. And it is this. They're actually going to tell us about it right here. Okay, let me just zoom in a little bit so we have it properly. There we go. Be mindful of religious freedom. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a note. So in Sivan 5749, so that's 1989, Rabbi Krinsky reported to the Rebbe. So Rabbi Krinsky was one of the Rebbe's principal, prime secretaries, the director of the Secretariat. He reports to the Rebbe that a verdict was expected from the Supreme Court regarding the right to display menorahs on public property, and the estimation was that the anticipated ruling would be positive, which it indeed was. He asked the Rebbe if he should prepare a statement for the press, because that was one of his jobs, was to be the spokesman on behalf of Chabad. So LNS was the Lubavitch news service, and they would prepare the statements on behalf of Chabad. They still do till today. And Rabbi Krinsky is still with us. Baruch Hashem, may he live and be well. And the Rebbe noted that it should be done in a manner, here we go, that would not drag us into any further disputes. On the actual statement prepared, the Rebbe noted his comments and corrections. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to explore, and this is typically the way the Rebbe often expressed his opinion, was somebody would hand in a note, or in this case, it's a press release that's going to be released, and the Rebbe is making his comments and edits to something that was already created in the Lubavitch style, in the Chabad style, but the Rebbe is making his edits to make sure that it meets with his approval. The Rebbe crossed a line through the framers of the Constitution of the United States never intended to separate government from religion, and left only the founders of this country believed in God. The Rebbe didn't want to point too much to the fact that the framers of the Constitution had the separation of church and state. Yes, that is true. That is also important. It may have another additional value, but that's not the point that the Rebbe wanted to talk about. The Rebbe wanted to talk about the fact that founders of this country believed in God, and they never intended for it to be a secular state. They may have wanted separation of church and state, yes, and that's a separate conversation, but they specifically wanted it to be religious. Where it said they came here to escape the religious persecution of governments that coerced its citizens to abide by an established religion to the exclusion of all others, the Rebbe replaced it with a religion accepted by the government. And where it said that they hoped to establish on these shores a life where people would enjoy religious freedom and worship freely, each in accordance with his or her beliefs, the Rebbe crossed the line through those last few words and noted, here we go, the Rebbe instructed to delete the line that said that each can serve God in accordance with his beliefs. The reasoning that, so the Rebbe's reasoning was Christianity is rendered as avodah zarah, as idol worship. So this ties into a halachic concept about the difference between Christianity and Islam. Christianity is viewed, depending which forms of Christianity, but in many of its forms, Christianity is viewed as avodah zarah, depending exactly how much power they ascribe to the Trinity, etc. It's not my field of expertise, so I won't comment on this. Contrary to the observance of Sheva Mitzvah B'nai Noach, obviously serving idolatry would be against these 7 Noahide laws for all mankind, as opposed to Islam, which is considered a monotheistic religion, which does not counter the Jewish view for non-Jews, the Jewish approach for non-Jews. Where it said that the menorah is particularly symbolic of religious freedom, the Rebbe replaced it with remindful. In other words, to the Rebbe, the menorah was, there we go, okay. To the Rebbe, the menorah was remindful of religious freedom. In other words, to the Rebbe, a Jew walking by sees a Hanukkah menorah and sees the menorah as a symbol of what? As remindful of what? As the holiday of Hanukkah. And the fact, light over darkness, etc. Never mind this year. Are you kidding me? After the story in Sydney, the horrible tragedy, the acts of brutality, I should say, not a tragedy, it's acts of brutality that happened in Sydney. For sure, the menorah is remindful of Hanukkah and the fact that a small a small bit of light pushes away lots of darkness, etc. But here's the other point that Rebbe is making, that a menorah is remindful to a non-Jew who sees a menorah, which is a symbol of religion. Yes, not his religion, that's fine. There's other symbols of other religions, but it's on public property. And what does it remind him? It reminds him that this is a free country. This is a country in which one of the cardinal points that we enshrine in our Constitution is freedom of religion, and the fact that we can the freedom to practice our religion openly, and in this case to do so even assisted by local government authorities. And I'll end off with a personal note that 2 months ago I had an opportunity. It was a bar mitzvah in the DC area, and my son was traveling with me, and I had an opportunity to take him to Washington DC, and we went to see lots of things. The White House, and we went to the Spy Museum, and we went to the Lincoln Memorial, and all sorts of wonderful things. But to me, the highlight was taking him into unfortunately, a very unpopular museum. It's free to go in, but it seems like a boring museum. And it's the Museum of Archives, I think, or the National Archive Museum, or something like that, where they have the Constitution and the original Bill of Rights and all of the important documents that represent our freedoms. And it was such a teaching opportunity for me to be able to tell my son, and we took a picture of him pretending to sign the Constitution, etc., but to be able to show him that the fact that we live in America, and America is a Medina Shel Chesed, which means the Rebbe often called it a country of kindness, that's built on compassion for other people, that's built on tolerance and equality for all, that everyone can have the opportunity to serve God in the way that they want to. Not to say that people shouldn't serve God. No, the founders were religious. They wanted to establish a religious country, but they didn't want to be persecuted for one religion or another, and they didn't want any of the religions to be the official religion of the government. This was something the Rebbe saw as unique. I'll just I know I said I'll end off with this personal story from me and my son and I's trip to mine and my son's trip to Washington D.C. But I want to add one more point. The Rebbe was the first Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, really I think the first Jewish leader ever to so publicly, I don't know if endorse is the right word, but to so publicly support our country and the way that our country governs. It's totally beyond the scope of today's lesson, but the Alter Rebbe, which was the first Chabad Rebbe, lived right before the War of 1812. In fact, the Alter Rebbe passed away during that war, and he was extremely opposed to Napoleon, even though Napoleon came with lots of freedoms for the Jews. Why? Because Napoleon's view of Judaism was that it should be under, I think it's called a consistoire, right? The consistory of basically the religion was going to be under the government, and the government was going to be able to control the religion. To the Alter Rebbe, this was enough grounds to oppose him. He would rather be under the Tsar, who wasn't getting involved in religion at all, and perhaps there was lots of anti-Semitism under the Tsar. There was lots of other physical discomforts for the Jewish people, but spiritually they left us alone. We can actually be allowed to practice Judaism openly. Obviously the Alter Rebbe didn't feel that the Russian government was necessarily the best government in the world. Neither he was also opposed to Napoleon, and throughout the generations. I mean, we don't need to say anything about the former Soviet Union, obviously, and many other governments that exist today in many countries. But so far as America goes, and so far as the Rebbe's relationship with America, the Rebbe was very, very proud to call himself an American. The previous Rebbe became a citizen of the United States. He literally wanted to become a citizen of the United States. Why? Because they believe that these values are such important values to defend the fact that we can practice our religion openly in this country. And that's something we should never take for granted. And that's something that the menorah, standing proudly in front of City Hall in Pasadena, or on the national lawn in Washington, D.C., etc., these menorahs remind us of that, and we should not take them for granted. Thank you very much for joining us today for the Rebbe's Lens. A freilichen, lichtigen, lustigen Chanukah, a happy and bright and light and joyous Chanukah. As difficult as that may seem in the face of all the darkness, it's up to us to do it. And I will see you all next week. Same time, same place, 1 p.m. right here for the Rebbe's Lens. The topic of next week's lesson is going to be choosing a career. The Rebbe's advice for choosing a career.